Right then. I'm beginning to understand why so many different streamers have a little bit of a chat back and forth with somebody before the stream actually starts. All I've got to talk with right now is just my cat. Yeah, he ain't much of a conversationalist. He does a pretty good meow if you scratch him in the right place, but that's about it. This is Hybrid Theory. I'm Aurian Archive. Let's get started. For tonight, I'm kind of going to be going back and running for badges inside of City of Heroes, and I really kind of want to focus on the Steam Deck because PC Gamer, if that was ever a misnomer, if I saw one, I think, had one of the dumbest, I mean, just sheer head slapping. Okay, I should probably preface this with first, I do understand that all of the news that is provided or forced through Google Chrome's Android news feed is propaganda. Somebody has a political or ideological message they want to push, and they're using the Google news feeds to push it, which is just downright annoying because it's really gotten to the point where anytime Google pushes a story to you, you know it's wrong. You do. It's not the full story. Somebody's lying. The question is who? And the better question after that is why does Google want to force feed you a lie? And if you can't answer that second question, you got problems I'm not qualified to deal with. All right, so back to the point at hand, the Steam Deck. Now, I, I guess I would call him a friend. Uh, who is very suspicious about Valve because Valve has a reputation of sorts. Valve is kind of the publisher developer who occasionally forgets that they, make games. The kind of publisher or developer who casually, completely ignores that they're supposed to make good games. The kind of developer or publisher who abandons items in the past. And they said, well, basically, and since I don't really have the permission of this particular person to be using their name, I will try to avoid saying it. And since I don't have a convenient online handle of theirs that I can use either, I don't exactly have anything I can just turn to and just reference them by. So calling them an associate sounds rude, but that may be a good phrase here. The associating question cites Valve's spotty history and willingness to abandon products as proof that the Steam Deck is doomed before it starts. And part of this opinion is driven by the Steam machines. Now, if you are not versed in Linux distributions, if you are not versed in ODMs, the original design manufacturers, if you are not versed in the original equipment manufacturers, if your sole exposure to Linux has been a Chromebook or your Android phone, some of this may indeed come across as storm in a teacup or completely, how can I put this? Completely irrelevant or unimportant data points. Only they're not. So we kind of have to step back in time and talk about Valve's previous products, both hardware and software, and how the Steam Deck is, if anything, an anti approach to Valve's previous ventures into physical products and computer sales. And to that, we kind of have to start back with the Steam machines. It's very easy in today's Chromebook dominated market to forget that not that long ago, developers hardware developers, not I don't mean game developers, I mean hardware developers, the vendors ATI, AMD, Intel, Qualcomm, all of the names out there of people who actually or entities who made physical hardware to put into a computer. I really should have grabbed a jetpack. Did I ever grab one? I don't think I did. There's a pay to win vendor here. I'm going to go visit. There they are. Yeah, let's grab a jetpack. Otherwise, I'm going to be falling a lot. All right. What's kind of important to remember looking back in history is that when the steam machines first came out, I mean, you could first buy one. Hardware vendors and software developers weren't exactly too keen on pushing Linux support. Your most recent graphics card probably didn't have a Linux driver. Your most recent processor probably didn't have an optimized Linux scheduler. Your insert device here, USB device, webcam, sound card, probably wouldn't work in the latest Linux kernel. The support just wasn't there. The product matrix on which products were supported under Linux operating systems were predominantly defined by fans of that product figuring out and reverse engineering how that product worked and making their own driver. And reverse engineering, to a certain extent, has a very specific place in driver development. Greg Coer Hartman of the who develops and works with the Linux kernel had a specific offer out that his team, his group, working on a Linux kernel, if somebody did not want to write a driver, contact Greg's team and they would write the driver. Sounds like a equitable agreement. You don't want to do the work, somebody else will do the work. The point then of the original Steam machines is Valve decided to leverage their massive presence in PC gaming to force vendors, repeat, force vendors to start writing and testing Linux drivers. And that's a very critical point to make. Incidentally, while I'm out here, if any Cryptic Studio devs are watching this, I would dearly love to know where the where that jump is supposed to go to, because there is nothing out here. No platform to land on, no secret Easter egg. The badges were put in later by the secret devs. It's why is there a jump out into the middle of nowhere? And again, if anyone knows the cryptic developer who did this zone, and they're willing to answer that question, please tell us, because that one has always bugged the living daylights out of me. All right, back to Steam machines weren't necessarily a product to put on a retail shelf in Walmart, in Best Buy, in CompUSA, in wherever, whatever. Steam machines were primarily by Valve a forced attempt to get hardware vendors to, do their job. I know, such an astounding concept. Actually, a hardware vendor actually doing the job that people think they're paying the hardware vendor to do. I mean, really mind blowing concept there. The problem is the Steam machines themselves were created in the only way I can phrase it, an almost epic level of naivety, innocence, naive, just complete and utter. Are you serious? Actions on Valve's part. Valve depended on the ODMs, the original design manufacturers and original equipment manufacturers, to actually write and test the Linux drivers. Valve really thought that not only would the vendors actually write the drivers, they would test the drivers. More to the point, Valve thought that the vendors and the OEMs, the big names, Alienware, the boutique vendors, Voodoo PC, and so on, would all gleefully and gratefully market these new products. On top of that, Valve was absolutely convinced that if they just got the products out into the marketplace, they got developers working on them, they got developers working with them, then the third party publishers, the big names, would start testing their software as well and start because at that point, Valve was integrating SteamOS capabilities into the Steamworks runtimes and the testing components, and Valve was really convinced, I mean, internally, really convinced that big publishers like EA, Take Two, and Activision were going to gleefully start adding Linux support as a default to all their AAA games. Yeah, that didn't happen. Valve vastly underestimated the open hostility to profit that the ODM and OEM computer market has. Valve vastly underestimated the entrenched mentality that nobody ever got fired for selling Microsoft. Valve vastly underestimated the inability of major publishers and developers to understand good coding practices. To Valve at that time, when they were doing all of their testing, they were uncovering bug after bug after bug, performance barrier after performance barrier. I mean, Valve's games were running better than ever, looking better than ever. They made a big deal about the same hardware when they thought they had already maxed that hardware out. And it was down to OpenGL, if used properly, was just cleaner and had far less driver overhead than DirectX. Even if you were running DirectX calls through an OpenGL wrapper, the amount of overhead you were losing in the OpenGL calls more than made up the performance difference of the wrapper. So Valve was running DirectX games under a wrapper faster than DirectX games on native drivers on native hardware. I mean, think about that for a second. That's how good OpenGL was if you had people who knew how to work it. And Valve they were developing these good coding practice interior to their business. They were finding out the hard way that maintaining a Linux and Windows build simultaneously, cross-compiling to both, and fixing the compiler errors was vastly improving the quality of Valve's internal software. And there is absolutely no debate or contest that Valve's online multiplayer games, Team Fortress 2 among them, Dota, are legendary for their net stability, for how stable they are, their net code, for how well the games themselves physically run across a wide range of hardware, and almost all of that comes down to Valve having forced themselves to develop good coding practices. Uh, Brief detour into what I'm doing. I'm There's a badge that's way up here, and I'll point the camera up. Way up top here is actually one of the that big rock right there is where one of the Shard Task Force ends. Now, theoretically, there is a path to jump up to those rocks. Now, finding that path and actually running it as a right now, I'm running Vidiot maps, so I have a bit of an overlay here. Finding and working that path upwards, it can be a bit of a oh, there we are. There's what I'm looking for. This should be my first jump up. Thing is, yes, I could turn on the jetpack and just make this, but since I am doing the live stream for this, if anyone else is watching and uh, they're just kind of curious, how was this? Intent is a big part in any game. How do developers intend something to work? If you don't understand the intent, you may need to rethink some things. So, we're trying to take the intended path, which is going to be a little complicated because most of the time I just throw on a jetpack and just hit lift. So this may not end well. Okay, so Valve, they vastly underestimated everyone. They Valve really thought that they could use their overwhelming position in the PC sales game space to actually get hostile publishers and developers to behave. And well, it didn't happen. The publishers and developers, the hardware vendors dug their heels in and, among many things, refused to promote Steam machines. Unless you were looking at a Steam machine on Valve's website, uh, good luck having ever figured out where or how to buy one. Unless you knew about them externally, good luck ever having purchased one. And even when you did purchase one, uh, Valve had made another critical error. And there's no other way to say it than critical error. Oh, okay, I know. Sorry, I'm looking for badge number 7, and I'm not entirely sure what path I need to take to get to it. Because I think it's on that rock right there. Or I just passed it on that rock. I think it's this one. Okay, so that was the cheat. Yeah, now I'm just using the jetpack to go back up to it. Alright. The other big mistake Valve made at the time is Valve based the Steam machines on Ubuntu. Now, this is where I kind of come into the picture because I was working with Mepis at the time, the Mepis Linux distribution. And prior to that, Mepis was one of the first, actually, it was the first Linux distribution to offer a GUI interface to install Windows, to install the, sorry, not Windows, to install, well, you could install the Windows Wi-Fi drivers using the GUI in Mepis. It also featured a graphical interface to install NVIDIA and AMD drivers or ATI drivers at the time. And that was a big deal because prior to then, installation of NVIDIA and ATI drivers required a complex uh, shutting down of the x.org server, installing the driver by the command line, which had and have it basically having to compile all the support software for the driver, and then it may or may not work. It really was hit or miss. So Warren, the team lead for Mepis, single-handedly for the most part, figured out a way to write the tools to get those incredibly difficult to install packages to install. And one of the big points of Mepis at the time is that the entire distribution was predicated on the idea that no one, repeat, no one should have to use the command prompt to run a desktop Linux. We're going back to 2003 and 2004 when we were doing this, 2005, 2006. I mean, this is where one of my identities come from is I was writing the guides for the Mepis distribution. And I was also helping software developers track down bugs. And when ATI AMD, then think this was post ATI purchase, started working on open source drivers, it really was a big deal. And I, of all people, was in a position to understand just how big a deal this was. What did I have not gotten that badge, I think. Okay, give me a second while I focus on trying to make sure I get the badge without dying, because these guys really can hurt me. There it is. Yeah, as I said in a previous live stream, I wasn't really looking forward to this because so many of the enemies here can see through stealth. And even with my stealth up, the Shinobi Ivy, and no, wait, that's not my stealth. Is it? Self deflame plus special, self endurance, self heal, self defense range, ninja reflexes. Okay, I didn't have ninja reflexes on. What's the special on here? Okay, granting use. Okay, that I was correct. That was my. Uh, let's quickly swap some of these around, and we'll actually move takeoff up here. Okay. All right, with a little bit more defense, we may have a better luck living through this. I'm hearing thunder in the background, so if I drop out, my apologies. Okay, so as someone who was heavily involved with the MEPIS community and the MEPIS distribution, I was also in a position to, and uh, Warren nearly broke his brain trying to explain to me once why tool chain development and tool chains really matter to the building of an operating system and the resulting tools. And it's like, if it weren't for Warren, I don't think I would have ever quite grasped why tool chain building is such a hugely important deal. But it was thanks to Warren that I also got an inside look at Mark Shuttleworth and the other side of Ubuntu. And one of the things I started saying very early on, and have never seen any evidence to the contrary, Ubuntu was always a hostile downstream to Debian. And I don't just mean that in a okay, I think I need to go up for this badge, but it may be I think it's on this level. Sorry. Yeah, easily distracted. I knew very early on that Mark Shuttleworth was not the benevolent dictator because of emails, because of phone calls, because of other, you know, we'll go ahead and say it, personal communications. Some of those were face to face. Mark Shuttleworth was not the savior of the modern Linux desktop that the Ubuntu crowd promoted him as. Ubuntu is always a hostile downstream to Debian. It was always about forking Debian and enforcing Debian developers to adopt the Ubuntu downstream as an upstream source. And thankfully, uh, I'm missing a badge, I think. There it is. I got to turn around, go this way. I'm kind of, do I stick with the jumping thing? Because yeah, we'll stick with the jumping thing for now. Okay, I think I see one I can use to get out of. That one will take me up, that one will take me out. So, yeah, if I stick with, yeah, no, even though you can go and buy a jetpack, if I stick with the jumping, somebody who's role playing a character who would never ever take a jetpack because they're scared of internal combustion engines going off right behind their heads. And if you think that someone won't role play a character like that, have I got a player you need to meet? All right. Okay, so early on, again, thanks to Warren, Ubuntu was hostile. And when Valve decided to base SteamOS on the Ubuntu distribution, on Ubuntu downstream, instead of working with Debian upstream, that kind of already spelled doom to begin with. Because Ubuntu was deliberately breaking the development toolchain, the programs and applications used to build the operating system. Ubuntu was deliberately breaking those in order to prevent direct binary application compatibility with other Linux operating systems. And yes, that is an incredibly rotten thing to do. But that's what Ubuntu was never about, the peace, love, harmony. It was all just a crock of week old, year old, smelly excrement. And this also kind of circled back around to in a previous life, in a previous hybrid theory. I talked for quite a bit about slagging on KDE's mistakes and slagging on the GNOME GTK clique. And some of that I kind of find myself doubling down on. Is there another highlighted path? Yeah, there is. I think if I follow these highlighted paths, no, wherever that's going. I think I gotta take this one up now. Yeah, I know, could just throw on a jetpack, but for the role players out there, I'm doing this for you. And I'm having fun. I've always liked the Shadow Shard. Okay. Oh, there. That was awkward. Okay. So, Valve's decision to use Ubuntu basically doomed the Steam Machine base operating system from the start. And I got a lot of mileage later out of being an absolute complete prat. Wait, was there? Nope, there's none down there. I've got to go up again. And there's no conveniently highlighted path this time. So it's got to be one of these over here. I think maybe this one? Let's see where this takes me. Okay, I'm going in the right direction. Up. Alright, so bringing it back around. Valve's attempts, and the big problem here is Valve found out very quickly with SteamOS, is that there were application breakages all over the place. Unless something was being packaged and distributed through the Ubuntu repositories, unless it was being adopted for upstream Ubuntu, it wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. All right, I think I need to get out there. Now, how do I get here? Okay, this path goes down here. And then this goes down here. And where did that put me in relation to? Oh, I see. That's what the white lines are indicating. Okay, so if I go over here, and now we're back to where we were. There's badge number 5. So we're down here, and where I went that way, I need to follow this white line here, and then we've got to bump up here. Okay, so there is an outline path. I'm just a complete and bloody idiot who's focusing on something else other than my map reading skills. Okay. Trying to wrap into the point. Yeah, tangents be here. There's also Ubuntu was uncomfortably close and linked with the GNOME GTK clique, which already, as previously discussed in previous live streams, redundancy is redundant, had already done a bang up wonderful job of pushing people, consumers, developers, hardware vendors away from the Linux platform simply by being complete and utter ideologue. Again, I find myself coming back to the most polite word I'm going to say on camera is jerks. The GNOME clique did more to harm open source and Linux than Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer ever did. If the GNOME clique had just done as they promised to begin with, we'd live in a technologically different world. But when you break promises, when you break statements, and then you just keep on breaking them, what do you think the end result's going to be? Duh! Here's your sign. You're a moron. And you're untrustworthy. Yeah, I know, getting ranty. Trying to keep back to the point here. So Valve, early on, they made several critical mistakes with Steam machines. They chose to go with a downstream rather than an upstream. They chose to trust hardware vendors, software developers who work for the hardware vendors, and that businesses would actually be interested in a profit motive and not a nobody ever got fired for selling that vendor motive. Yeah. To call it innocence is a stretch. Valve had access to a number of industry professionals who probably clued them in that things weren't going to go as smoothly as Gabe Newell and Doug Lombardi wanted things to go. But while Valve again figured their sheer market presence was, if no one else wanted to play along, they would just force them along or they'd do all the work themselves. And that's really what happened with Steam machines is Valve found themselves doing all of the work. They found themselves supporting the operating system all by themselves. They found themselves writing the translation software all by themselves. They found themselves writing the drivers all by themselves with virtually no support from all of the other parties involved. And that's what it really came down to is Valve was the only entity that was pushing Steam machines as a viable computing alternative. None of their partners were even interested. None of the investors, none of the executives, no one involved cared about what was a good business decision. They cared about what was the safe career option. And when that kind of mentality, for lack of a better phrasing here, infests, I mean, like rot from the inside, you get the kind of aggressive, passive aggressive, let it die. And in the situation, the scenario was even more complicated by big OEMs buying up the small boutique vendors who were actually interested in pushing products that sold, not products that guaranteed career safety. And it's sort of like when Voodoo PC was bought by HP. Most of us saw that the writing was on the wall. Voodoo PC would never release a compelling computer design again. When Alienware was bought by Dell, everyone knew that Alienware would no longer produce high end equipment again. It just wasn't going to happen. And true to form, no, it hasn't happened. I mean, if you buy an Alienware computer, you have more money than sense. You really do. Now, that being said, in the COVID pandemic conditions, where Dell was able to have computer components in stock, yeah, I'll go ahead and give people a pass for buying in a socialist lockdown the only product that are available. Because if you need a computer and the only one you can get is from Dell, and the only system that has the hardware that you need has Alienware branded on it, you buy what you need if that's what you need. And you're kind of stuck. I mean, you get screwed over, but you're stuck. So flash forward, and we have more hardware in this. Whoa! Boy, 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 boy. That hurt. That was almost a debt right there. That was really too close for comfort. All right. So next up, the next major hardware push from Valve was both the Steam Link and for various reasons, I'm kind of skipping the VR hardware because that was never mass consumer price nor mass consumer focused to begin with. And there we go, deaded. And I never, while I was at pay to win vendor, I should have gone ahead and just bought a self res. Do I have enough inspiration to? Yes, I do have enough inspiration to make a self res. Oh, this is only going to get more brutal as I go to the last zone. Because I'm pretty sure that infiltration and as I wait for endurance to come back. Well, okay, let's see what that stat gives me. Combat attributes, base, hide power sources, stealth radius, PVE. All right, we're at 66 feet on infiltration plus celerity. Oh, sorry, not that one. Well, that I do need that one up. And we're at 65 feet. So I actually have a little bit more stealth, but it's probably not going to matter much. All right, I want to go down. Now, this badge, I don't actually know if there is a way to get out of here that does not involve a jetpack. Zoom in, there's the badge. Because as far as I can see, there is no jump pad out of here. So I think this one is a suicidal badge. Let's see, the badge itself is misbegotten. You're no hero, you're a thug. Oh. Okay. You're a leech. Have you no? Wow. Okay, that's an awfully introspective. All right, let's jetpack out of here. And next one, I guess I'll just continue the circle around. All right, we'll go back to Mighty Leap and just try to stay out of their range. I may jet one or two more times. All right. So, a lot of mistakes were made on Steam machines. And in retrospect, again, a lot of it was just the naive assumptions made by Valve that their partners would be in it for a business, not for further career planning. And we've pretty much all heard about the L+1 promotion plans that big tech companies love. You leave one company, accept a position at another company, then you come back at your previous level +1 because now your original employer has to rehire you. And people start doing career moves instead of working on an actual product. And if you ever wondered why Google products suddenly suck, there's your reason. Yeah, like this channel was ever going to get monetized. I guess I would have to either start an OnlyFans or a Patreon. Yeah, at this point, I kind of regret that this one person's not online to respond to that. Because they love making OnlyFans jokes. Oh, well, any. Oh, woof. By the way, around here, one of these places, there is a hole in the geogap. So be very, very careful when jumping around some of these islands because they are not geometry complete. Occasionally I jump into it and it's a little awkward. And yeah, I blew the jump on that. I needed to be heading that way. And you also have to watch the jumps. Okay, so trying to stay on target, stay on target. Valve then changed things up when it became apparent that they really were the only vendor interested in a business when it came to making and selling computing devices. They weren't interested in career moves, they were interested in what was the best move for the consumer, what gave the consumer more freedom, what made the consumer want to say, I want to buy my games on Steam rather than I'll just buy the games on whatever other platform. What value was Valve bringing to the table that other developers and publishers and hardware vendors were not bringing? And to that end, we got the Steam Link, which was Steam's version of a casting device. Now, I have a Steam Link, and the Steam Link as a hardware device did something completely amazing for my Linux desktops that, well, personally, okay, to put this in perspective, I talk about my media server often. My media server is a Ryzen 1800. I'd have to go check it, but I think it's an 1800 that's running a GeForce 6600 Ti. Yes, I did pick up a 6600 Ti, and there's also a reason why I haven't replaced the dying R9 290X that I'm running on now with the 6600 Ti. The drivers suck. NVIDIA software support is abysmal. Okay, that's going down a complete other path. But that actually goes back into the other problem going the vendors who were not interested in supporting the hardware. And Nvidia has long promoted themselves as they have the best Linux drivers. Team Green is where you go for performance on Linux. Well, having a 1660 Ti and having had to use Nvidia drivers, yeah, that's a crock of shit. Let me repeat that, because if you've been listening to any of these streams at all, you know I do try to avoid the obscenities, the cuss words, the four-letter words. NVIDIA is full of shit. Their drivers are abysmal. And I have run into so many scaling issues. I have run into. Okay, what I mean by scaling issues is that, like, when I go to a when I went directly to my TV, my user interface insists on displaying, the NVIDIA driver insists on displaying a ludicrously high DPI, even when I forcibly change the DPI down to make the screen readable and usable. And this is one of the reasons why I don't use the media server for anything other than serving media. Is okay, yeah, the 1660 is capable of, uh, it's a full Vulkan compliant graphics card. It's probably capable of being a really good gaming card. But it wasn't until I got a Steam Link and started casting from Steam on that Nvidia card to the Steam Link, and Valve's capture system, the hardware kind of limited to the display to 1080 natively, and suddenly my unreadable, unusable display at the television was completely readable on a monitor through Steam Link. On top of that, because of however the way Steam Link works, I retained full access up to and including being able to shift. Uh, when you drop into different shells, Control Alt F1, Control Alt F2, when you go into the different shells, like most things are what, Control Alt F3, or maybe it's Control. I'd have to go down and do the muscle memory again. But if I had to kill the next section and then restart it, or if I just had to log in while the screen was locked out, I could do that on Steam Link, and it was like I was using my desktop without having the computer physically at me. It was just the best remote tool, and part of that because, yes, the streaming was being done in a hardware processing platform, and Steam was able to gain root access and work at a root level. Now, okay, from a data security perspective, that is kind of, you really don't want to do that. And that's really, if you're really going all in for security. But for my media server, wasn't really worried about it. Yeah, confessions of somebody who do as I say, not as I did. I still nuke the hell out of sudo, though. Okay, tangent. Why does sudo suck? The problem is with sudo, the very big problem is that you can technically feed any arbitrary command line that you want to it. Think about that for a second. If somebody has a malicious file on your computer and it's named the same as an acceptable package and you use sudo to put that package on there, someone with physical access to your computer in sudo, or even remote access in an open sudo connection, can still maliciously hijack and do rude things to your computer on a Linux system. Put it bluntly, if somebody's going to get root access to my computers, they're going to have to input my password. It's just that simple. There is no automatic, you're going to switch user and do this. No, if you want to do a root operation, you're going to have to know my password. There's no other way. You're going to have to type it in, and that's the only way that access is getting gotten. And I hate sudo with a passion. And, yeah, okay. Tangenting away from Valve Steam machines, we're up to Steam Link. Now, the big problem with Steam Link is that it was always a temporary solution. Casting to other devices, the Chromecast, the Fire TVs, they were popular products for people who were still running older televisions, older devices. But as the cost of newer television fell, the Vizios, well, actually, really, Vizio probably deserved most of the credit here for bringing the cost of 4K and smart TVs down to a acceptable level. Really, those all-in-one smart television that now costs no more than an average ordinary television, or if anything, we're bringing the price below what an average ordinary television would have cost, pretty much rendered most of these streaming devices impractical. The only reason why you'd want a streaming device is that you would need to update your software, and some TVs might not be so conducive to updating software. Okay, real quick, on the game in front of me, this badge, just grab a jetpack or jump to it, because to get to it using the purple pads, you've got to go all the way around and come back. This is just an awkwardly placed badge, but easy enough to get, and onward we go. Okay. Any and the other big factor is that at the same time that the Steam Link came out, Android phones were already a thing. You could get a cheap Android phone that could do the same function as a Steam Link that had the same hardware as a Steam Link underneath for not much money. I mean, you can go onto AliExpress, Banggood, DHgate, and get yourself a perfectly acceptable low-end MediaTek phone for not much money. All right, we are coming up on one of the I might det on this one, because that badge is right there in that corner, and there's almost always a spawn sitting on top of it. See if I can spot the badge first. There it is, right there. This may hurt. Part of me is going, I should not have pulled that off. I really shouldn't have pulled that off. Okay. Just 2 more badges to go, and I'm done with the Shadow Shard. And only 1 det. Whew. I can make it. I can do it. Where are you? Oh, frig. I live! And just in case you're wondering, yes, all of the enemies out here are 50. And now we get back to my old dance party place. It's actually one of my favorite spots in the game, in City of Heroes. Out here, it's kind of easy to imagine the thunder crackling, the energy sifting through the air, lightning striking down, but when you're standing on top of here, if anything, it's quiet. You've stormed the palace. There's nothing up here but a couple of tempests. It's kind of floating. All right. And next, again, if anyone from Cryptic who made this zone has an explanation, what is going on with these islands? There is actually a jump pad from here back to the Storm Palace itself. There's a jump pad right over here. There's a couple more jump pads, so they did something with these. And then again, all the way out here, there's a jump pad into nothing. I mean, where does it go? What was supposed to be out here? And just in case you're wondering what happens if you go the other way down this big rock in space, there's a jump pad out here. It literally sends you careening all the way back to the beginning. Yeah, the Nameless Mystic. think that's supposed to be a void hunter. Or, no, maybe a Keld? I don't know. He was added, I think, by the secret deaths. There's also a base portal out here, in addition to the hospital. It's kind of a neat little setup that they got here. This actually does, I think, make this feel more like an outpost that you've gone into the. There actually is a presence out here, a combat medic, a mystic who's just hanging around. Kind of the area's been cleared out. There's no enemies here. And off that way, the big floating ball of doom. Okay, back to steam machines. And, alright, so, sewing things together again. The Steam Link was basically always. Well, I could have just base portaled out of there, or I could have just Auro'd out. And we'll just take Oro out. Alright, so Steam Link, it was a device that was pretty much, as a hardware solution, I think there always is going to be a space for a device like Steam Link. I think its real value, however, might be in the IT world, where you would need a secure in-network link. And if you had a really good encryption between your host device and the in-network Steam Link, that kind of device probably has a very good future as a remote access device. You need to give a presentation from a secure device, or you've got some trade secrets or something like that. The Steam Link was actually and still is a pretty good remote access controller that worked pretty much agnostically of any computer system as long as it could run Steam. And then here's the important bit to remember on Steam is that Valve is still updating it. Yeah, Valve is still issuing updates for the Steam platform. Valve is still issuing updates for the Steam Link device. See, where can I not go yet? Okay, Praetoria. Praetoria is all that's left. So we're going to go start Night Ward. Anyway, so. And then along with Steam Link, there was the Steam controller, which is arguably Valve's biggest failure in terms of absolute abject failures. Now, as I've stated in a previous stream, and to restate, my big problem with the Steam controller was not the dual trackpads, was not the single analog stick, was not the buttons. My complaint was the size. While you could get the plans to manufacture your own Steam Link, I'm sorry, not Steam Link, Steam controller, you never could get the device internals at a smaller size. Now, if the Steam controller had been, just put on a photocopier, shrink it by 10%, it probably would have fit a lot more comfortably in most users' hands. The Steam controller was not as egregiously painful to wear. Well, I am definitely getting tired, so I may just crash out soon and have to finish this tomorrow. And then my thoughts will be even more jumbled, and I'll have even more tangents to dance down. Okay. The Steam controller, if it could have just been made a little bit smaller, just a little bit smaller, it would have been more comfortable for more people to hold. And the more comfortable a device is to hold, the more people are going to use it. Everyone mocks the Xbox Duke controller now because it is ludicrously oversized. Now, there are some people out there who do have big hands, and if you have big hands, a controller like the Duke is actually a lot of people, a statistically large amount of people, did like the Duke controllers precisely because it was big. And there's always going to be, I think, from a hardware perspective, you really need to have two different form factors in mind, or you need to be willing to let third parties have a go at your connection protocols and your hardware specifications and just make their own versions that are of different sizes. For example, there is a market for micro GameCube controllers for Smash Bros. Players. There is a market for Duke controllers for the Xbox. There is a market for regular Xbox controllers. And when it comes to a handheld device, to a handheld platform, generally speaking, most vendors error on the side of smaller hands. They kind of base the device around the idea that the average common user will likely be a child. So devices like Nintendo's DS, you had the Nintendo DS XL, which was much better suited to someone with larger hands, an adult, whereas the original DS and say maybe the Game Boy Micro were much better suited to a child's hands. Excuse me. Or rather the DS Lite, because the original DS was actually kind of a pretty bulky monstrosity. So keeping in mind form factor, I think this is one of the things we're going to see with the Steam Deck in within the next calendar year. And we'll get to that when I get to actually talking about the Steam Deck. But the Steam controller, again, gave Valve lots of valuable insight. Somebody's battle cry is take that 01001101 space 01000110. I I really think that's hilarious. One second. And the Steam controller really, it also showed Valve, and it's something Valve has talked about quite often before, the valuable market of differently enabled controllers. There's a large number of gamers out there who fell in love with the Steam controller's gyroscopic capabilities and the touchpads for leaning in various games. And there are entire the big a big selling point for the Steam controller was those custom profiles, where various people could optimize a controller layout for a specific game, and then other gamers could come along and download that specialized configuration without having to make those choices or make those configuration change choices themselves. And for a number of players, this was like a big time saver rather than spending 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out how to map the controls. Someone else may have already done it, and you could have just taken their work and then tweaked it to however you wanted to play. And that was actually a pretty big deal, a pretty big leap forward. I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to jump that without hitting. Uh, yes, that is a secret door. On the uh, light side, it's actually kind of marked. So if you theoretically, you're only supposed to be in this zone if you have done first ward, so that the door at the bottom leads up here should not really be a surprise. And there we go. That's all the badges for this zone. And now let's go find a light tunnel and move into first ward. Okay. But the Steam controller was also a market failure. It was too different. And again, for a lot of people, it was just wrongly sized. It was just too big to hold comfortably. And if you can't hold the controller comfortably, you're not going to take any time to learn how to use its innovative features. No matter how good the trackpads might have been, the size of the Steam controller meant that, at least for me, it was never going to be my go-to controller for any game. I forced myself to play a lot of games with it to try and get a handle on it. But that's really what it came down to, is I was having to force myself to use the Steam controller, even though it was not the controller I really wanted to use. And, if you're wondering, well, what controller do you use? as much as I slag on Microsoft, and I do that all the friggin' time, the Xbox controller is a perfectly valid, perfectly usable, perfectly accessible, perfectly compatible with Linux game controller. In fact, I got a howl out of this, uh, in that the original Xbox the X no, no, I had a 360, and this is one of the things where you can get me screaming and ranting about Microsoft for days on end. And that my 360 Red Ring of Death and Microsoft flat out refused to repair, replace, or do anything. Just not going to service it. Get a new Xbox. That's your only option. And that, as a user, just kind of is a Red Ring of Death. It's your own hardware's fault. Okay, before I get too bitter about that. But I still had the 360 controller, and I picked up a wireless adapter for it. And under Windows, that wireless adapter was a pain in the rear end to use. Out of curiosity, one day I hooked it up to my Linux system. The adapter was recognized on plug-in, and the controller connected. No fuss, no muss. It just worked. And I couldn't stop freaking out about it that the support for a Microsoft product was better on Linux than it was on Windows. And okay, so I know some people are kind of uh you surely didn't use an Xbox controller before that. Yeah, that's right. I used a Wii U Pro controller, which for a long while was my go-to controller if a game needed a controller input. And I've kind of always been bitter that when Valve was testing big picture with controller mode, there was some kind of reward or something, and it didn't accept that my Wii U Pro controller counted as a valid controller for that promotion. Yeah, I'm still a little bitter. Okay, a lot bitter. Very bitter. Okay, the uh, the Steam controller kind of, I don't want to say it was a designed failure, but it's the kind of hardware lesson that too many vendors are too scared to make. Nobody but Valve was going to try a controller like the Steam controller. Nobody but Valve was going to take a risk that it would crash and burn. Nobody but Valve was willing to say, we think this is a really good idea. We're going to push it and then push it. I'm going to need another drink of water in a minute. And then we kind of flash forward to now. Again, I'm skipping over the VR hardware because VR has always been and always will be a gimmick. Now, I know you're kind of some people might be tilting. Yes, there it there is an ocean liner capsized in here. Well, an oil boat, I think. How it got there, don't know. I suspect a gravity controller was just throwing it around. That's just me. That's what my gravity controllers would have done. Chunk of boat, as somebody said. Boat Doken. Okay, going back, trying to stay on topic since we are getting rather late. And I do need to get that thing called sleep. Sleep is for the weak. Somebody hit me with a frying pan. Alright. The Steam controller market failure. Steam Link designed market obsolescence. Steam machines, they weren't the product that people thought they were. They were an attempt to force vendors to do vendors' jobs. And as Valve found out the hard way, vendors were more interested in career protection than product sales and service. And sad, but true. And that brings us now up to the Steam Deck, which in almost every single way is an anti-Steam machine. Oh, by the way, I just got the denial of service badge. That is a specific uh, accomplishments badge. The easiest way to do it, and uh, I'm just going to Again, I'm not at high level. I'm not at max level. I'm just 39. I have nothing in sprint. I'm just going to sprint towards this barrier, and even if you are low level and only have sprint or jump or a jetpack, you can make it through and get the denial of service badge and get worked back in before you get squunched. This is the best place to do it, where I am in the south on this diagonal line here of First Ward. And hello, Mother Mayhem's Hospital, where everybody with mental problems goes to get more mental problems. All right. And on first glance, we already see multiple differences with the Steam Deck versus the Steam Link versus the Steam Crawler versus the Steam machines. For starters, Valve's using a very different software platform. They've changed over to Arc Linux and they're using KDE Plasma. Now, to reference the previous live stream where I ranted about the era of the Steam machines and the problem with the GNOME Clique, GTK, and KDE shooting themselves in the foot. KDE Plasma, the developers learned almost all of their lessons and implemented those lessons. KDE Plasma is hands down the best Linux desktop, period. It can service all the different needs that Linux desktop users have in a resource-friendly environment. For a mobile platform, with all the work that was done and all the lessons learned with Plasma Active. Okay, this is where I would say, if you've done First Ward, you know that the entrance to the building is there, where that purple mark is. So when you go to Night Ward, you know the entrance is there, even though it's not marked. And this is the funky badge just on the back side of the building, where you see this relief. And no, I don't think my cat has just come up and just put his paws on my arms. I think he's trying to tell me it's time to go to bed. I still have more to talk about. I have no idea what this relief is about, but I suspect it was supposed to be in. What the what? Uh, I didn't know it would do that. I really didn't know it would do that. Now I'm curious, what happens if I click Tor on this side? All right. So the first thing we see is Valve's not trusting any other original design manufacturers or original equipment manufacturers. Valve has built up its own internal resources to produce its own hardware in its own facility that Valve controls. You cannot enter. Yeah, that's what I was expecting when I clicked on that door and didn't get. Okay, gotta go back to First Ward now. And okay, big change. Valve, and more importantly, Valve is not necessarily depending on any manufacturing facilities where the Chinese Communist Party can walk in and say, you're going to sell to these people and you're not going to deliver the product to those people. And yes, that's what's happened with the GPU supply and the processor component supply. The CCP ordered the factories on Chinese soil to not sell to the intended vendors. I'm stating that as fact, not conjecture. Fact. All right, did I get all of the plaques in here? I think so. I just got a location. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got all of the plaques. Let's go back and make sure I got that one. Number 6. Because I don't think I got it. Because I think a history badge would have popped up. Because this one's No, there's a category history, so that I may have gotten it. Gotta jump, gotta jump, gotta jump. All right. Since I am now at the point where I am actively slurring words and having difficulty focusing, even more so than usual, double check and make sure I got that plaque. I think what I'm going to do then is I'm going to cut it here now that I've kind of been over the history of the machines, of the mistakes Valve has made, and then on the next hybrid theory, I will start to go into how the Steam Deck is an answer to all of the issues and problems that Valve has faced in the past. Now, if you're wondering what I'm up to right now, I'm actually looking for this area over here. The dust facility is a day job badge. We see up here logging off in dust gives me special damage, plus 2 hit, plus range. So, this is Aurian Archive, and I'll catch you later.